is in the title. The big change in adoptions. Babies can't get parents. According to Ross, the most desirable babies now cannot receive adoption because there is so great a decline in couples desiring to adopt babies. As a result, the San Diego County Welfare Department and many other similar agencies finds itself with an increasing number of babies and a decreasing ratio of adopting parents. The Child Welfare League of America has reported that in 5 years, the number of children available for adoption has increased 44.5%, while the number of applications has increased only 27%. But this is not all. The birth rate is dropping alarmingly all over the world. While the propagandists talk about a population explosion, the reality is a plunging decline in birth rate all over the world. In California, in one of the better areas birth rate-wise, hospitals have recorded a 1/3 to 1/2 drop in births in the past 3 years, and more maternity divisions are now losing money. At the present rate, we will soon have a statewide surplus of schoolrooms when the deceased. Soon have statewide surplus of schoolrooms when the decreased birth rate hits the schools. The plain fact is that there is a serious population decline, and in some parts of the world, as in Vienna, Austria, the death rate is double the birth rate. 2/3 of the nations of Europe are failing. In 2/3. Two-thirds of the nations of Europe are failing even to reproduce their present adult population. There is no great reason to be surprised at all this. The most effective birth control in all history is in operation today, and it is not the pill nor anything medical. It is the law. The law today penalizes parents at every turn and discourages responsible parenthood. If you're a parent, this is what you face. You're guilty. You are the guilty party. You are the guilty party if your child gets into trouble. If a child becomes delinquent, it is because the parents failed in their responsibility, we are told. If the child's academic performance is poor, then the parents are accused of failing to motivate the child. At every turn, the law denies the biblical doctrine of personal responsibility and holds to environmentalism. The parents are the environment of the child, and therefore they are held to be responsible. They have not done enough for the child or loved the child enough. The result is that on every turn there are legal and social inducements to juvenile irresponsibility. Since the child is already a sinner by nature, these inducements provide opportunities for the development of the child's sinful nature. It is no wonder that the child becomes a spoiled monster. On top of this, there are financial penalties of being a parent. There are financial penalties to being a parent. It's an expensive thing today to rear a child, to feed and clothe it, to place it in a Christian school, provide for a college education and maintain a home large enough to house a family. The annual expense is very high when all these factors are considered, but the tax benefit is a $600 exemption annually. Even more than the pill, the law today discourages parenthood. But this is not all. The parents support the child today for 18 years if the child quits school after high school graduation. But increasingly, the support extends on through junior college, and even graduate school. It is no exaggeration to say that each child receives an average of 20 years of support. But the help does not end there. When the child marries, the support very often continues in direct and indirect ways. In many cases, the parents help provide employment, furniture, or other items, but without this, the support is still considerable. Consider, for example, the number of grandparents whose week is regularly tied to some babysitting, or who do all the babysitting for their children's vacation. Consider also the number of grandmothers who babysit while their daughters go to work to increase the family's income, and also the number of grandparents who have taken over the children temporarily or permanently because of divorce. Add to this the cost of presents regularly for 2 or 3 children, their husbands and wives, and all the grandchildren. Most grandparents find they must keep a date book for all the birthdays, anniversaries, graduations, and the like in their family. The result is that parents give full support to a child for a good 20 years and partial support for another 30 years, for a half century. Then, perhaps, in their declining years, a father or mother or both need help because inflation has wiped out their savings, or long, serious illnesses have drained both their finances and their health, and they need physical care and financial help. How many can go to their children? Most parents say, "I would never want to." What they too often mean is that they don't want to be humiliated by the children's reluctance to help. This whole picture adds up to one fact: the absurdity of parenthood today. Our legal framework has made it absurd. Love does not flourish, nor health develop, under a condition of parasitism. If someone is a continual parasite on someone, perpetually receiving and never giving, always asking but never repaying, that person is hardly likely to be loved. When the law allows children to become parasites, then the law is working to destroy the natural relationship of parent and child. In a normal family, the child needs parents much of his life, and then the parents need the children. And unless the relationship works both ways, it's a sick one and is socially destructive. It leads to a false independence on the part of parents and to a false dependence on the part of children. Parents who need to rely now on their children refuse to do so and make foolish decisions. And children who need to care for their parents stand around coldly waiting to divide whatever inheritance there may be. Is it any wonder that many are refusing to be parents under these conditions? Parenthood today is an absurdity by law. The child is a legally protected parasite. Not only is the child made a lifelong parasite, but our society makes adolescence a legitimate form of insanity. We have come to associate adolescence with rebelliousness and emotionalism, and we consider this to be a naturally a time of stress in a person's life. But this is not true of every culture, nor was it once true of our own. Adolescence has often been in history a particularly proud and happy age, the time of maturity. It's a mentally sick and spiritually sinful adolescence that wants independence while being subsidized by the parents. The answer to these problems is very clearly established in Scripture. The children are commanded, not asked, to honor their father and mother. Notice the form of the commandment. Children are not asked to love their parents, but they are required at all times to honor them, and until they establish their own homes, to obey their parents. Deuteronomy 5:16, Ephesians 6:1-3. This is not made a matter of choice. It is a matter of law. Children are not asked by God to love their parents, nor parents to love their children. Love cannot be commanded, and even more basic than love is obedience to God and to God's commandments. Parents must bring up their children, quote, in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, St. Paul tells us, Ephesians 6:4, And nurture means discipline, and admonition means commandments. The commandment is, quote, "Obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right." Ephesians 6:1, that is, it must be God-centered, God-ordered obedience, not a humanistic one. But this is not all. Our Lord made clear that a gift to God was not acceptable or holy if it meant denying one's parents of their due care. He denounced the Pharisees and scribes for countenancing such a thing. What they? Ye suffer him no more to do aught for his father or his mother, making the word of God of none effect through your tradition. Mark 7:12 and 13. St. Paul declared that, quote, "If any provide not for his own, and specially for those of his own house, he hath denied the faith, and is worse than an infidel." 1 Timothy 5:8. By this, St. Paul meant that parents have an obligation to care for their own, which means both their children and the grandparents also, as need may require. This did not say that grandparents are duty-bound to receive help or to live with their children. It does say that their needs, as they arise, must be met by their children, and that this is a requirement by God. Failure to meet this requirement is a denial of the faith, and more than that, Paul declares, makes one, quote, "worse than an infidel," end quote, "a consummate hypocrite and denier of the faith." The Bible's language here is very blunt, and with reason, because a departure from this law means a departure from Christian social order. It means the enthronement of a self-centered psychology and the destruction of family life. Instead of being a blessing, children become a curse. Instead of maturity, they develop into full-fledged parasites who sponge on their parents and create a socialist society. Socialism is simply a social order which attempts to take over the functions of the family and provide cradle-to-grave security, which is the function of the family. In order to have socialism, there must be a population of spoiled children who want a great father who can provide them with more than their parents can, take their parents off their hands, and protect them from the necessity of growing up. Whenever and wherever the family breaks down, socialism results as the substitute for the family. But socialism destroys itself because it cannot truly replace the family, and unless the family reestablishes its godly order, the result is chaos. There are no shortcuts to liberty and maturity. The godly family is basic to a free country. Wow, what an indictment. Oh boy. Wow, well, that was explosive. Good medicine. Wow. Okay, folks, let's skip to 24. Custom and morality. Customs or social mores govern us often much more strongly than does morality. Most people are more afraid of offending their friends through bad taste than of offending God by sin. God who... girls who still have a All right, well, I'll take this opportunity to say that thanks for listening. Appreciate it. Thanks for being with me in the booth. If you want to support this work, you can do so by liking, sharing, all that stuff. Let's try from there. Most people are more afraid of offending their friends through bad taste than of offending God by sin. Girls who think nothing of disobeying God and that, and their parents. Girls who think nothing of disobeying God and their parents will actually weep over the thought of facing their friends with an old dress. There's a story of a girl a few years back who, facing the possibility of a cold and working in a drafty, facing the possibility of a cold and working in a drafty office, was persuaded to go to work wearing some old-fashioned and heavy underwear. At the close of the day, she accepted a dinner engagement with a businessman who stopped by, went to his hotel room with him with no hesitancy, and then, suddenly remembering her underwear, fought like a tigress to prevent events from taking their expected course. It was not sin she dreaded, but being seen with old-fashioned underwear. This illustration points up an important social reality. In every age, there are many to whom appearance is more important than morality, but when an age is dominated and controlled by such a disposition, the result is a rapid social decline. Morality requires faith and courage. It means making a stand and taking a course in terms of God's reality rather than man's reality. Morality in a sinful world places a man in tension with that world at the very least, and potentially in direct opposition to it. The moral man is governed by God and his conscience, and, as a result, he is more inclined to be independent of the group and self-reliant in relationship to society. Morality is productive of godly individualism and independence of spirit. Where custom rules, however, a contrary spirit prevails. No, that's not right. Contrary and contrary are not the same word, are they? Where custom rules, however, a contrary spirit prevails, people become group-directed, and they feel it imperative to be members of the pack. Their standards vary as the customs and fads of the group vary. Instead of being individualistic, they are collectivistic, anxious at all times to be with a particular group whose customs are their social code. Society, then, is governed by mob psychology, by the law of the pack, and the social order lacks stability or character. Today, custom rather than morality governs our world, and our politics is the politics of the pack. The accepted social image must be met, or a man, however good his character and qualifications, has little chance for office. Abraham Lincoln receives almost worship from people today, but only because he is a century away. His high-pitched voice would get only ridicule and laughter from today's voters, and many of his personal mannerisms would rule him out of consideration for any office. We've become savagely intolerant of harmless mannerisms and physical conditions which are not approved of by the pack, and at the same time, we regard as unimportant the essentials of morality. Men have been re-elected to public office repeatedly after clear-cut evidence of their immorality and misconduct of office. Sometimes their misconduct has even enhanced their popularity. This attitude is no less prevalent in the churches. Let us examine a specific and typical case. A very prominent, talented and handsome minister of a very important church was repeatedly guilty of dishonesty. Although it was well known that he said whatever pleased people without regard for the truth or another man's reputation, no one thought ill of him for this, and his popularity increased. He was, moreover, far from believing that all that he preached and professed to believe, and this too was known, and yet he continued to flourish. Then, quite suddenly, his wife died and left him with 3 small children. He was totally helpless in caring for them. One of his wife's relatives who came to the funeral saw his plight and stayed to help him. About 6 months later they married, since the man obviously needed her and had come to love her, and maintaining 2 homes was a financial drain. In a very real sense, this marriage was one of the few commendable acts in this minister's life. But he lost his pastorate because of it, because the members were outraged that he did not wait a year before remarrying. Custom was to them more important than morality. This is useless. Oh dear, folks. Some members made it clear that they would have been indulgent of sexual irregularities during that year, but an open flouting of custom they held to be unforgivable. Wherever a society places custom above morality, there a revolutionary situation exists. When custom is more important than morality, the first step towards revolution has been taken. The moral foundations of the social. The moral foundations. The moral foundations of the social order have been denied, and a revolution in standards and behaviour has taken place. As a result, an important thrust of all subversive activity is the undermining of morality. Where morality has been undermined, law and religion have also been undermined, so that the major task of revolution has been accomplished. A revolution cannot readily succeed where the existing order has moral vitality, but a revolution is virtually accomplished where moral order has been destroyed. Moral order represents the establishment on earth of objective ethical or moral truth. It is the conformity of earth and man to the will and word of God. Moral order establishes society in more than itself. It grounds society in truth and thereby makes possible the health and welfare of society as a whole, and it provides the best possible framework for the liberty and development of man. Customs, mores, or folkways are merely the conventions of a people. Sometimes they are helpful, at other times they are not only a hindrance but a menace, especially when they govern a people. It is socially and personally advantageous for people to be concerned about their appearances. It makes for greater cleanliness, attractiveness, and social courtesy. Such customs and conventions have their place, but it must be a subordinate one. When appearance becomes more important than morality, then social decadence prevails and society is in the midst. Then social decadence prevailed, and society is in the midst of revolution. The greatest asset to any revolutionary group is a large body of people who are governed by conventions or customs. With such people, since appearance is all that matters, the country can be gutted of its historical position, constitutionalism and liberties, and there will be no objection as long as the form is retained. The same is true of their church relationships. They do not ask that their church be truly Christian, but only that it retain the form of being Christian. Their church can deny the faith every Sunday, teach their children. Teach their children the new morality, abandon its confession of faith, maintain through its missionary programs a revolutionary campaign, and these people will never leave. They will maintain a facade of being Christian by complaining indignantly about some of the most flagrant activities of their church and clergy, but they will never leave, and rightly so, because they belong there. The dead among the dead. These people who cling to the appearance rather than the reality are the bread and butter of all revolutionary groups. They finance them, support them, and defend them, because they too are revolutionists. They are in revolt against moral order, and they substitute conventional order in its place. They are the first wave of every revolution, and even though the second wave first uses them and then destroys them, the conventional people are still part of the revolution. This means we cannot treat people who sit complacently in apostate churches and who ignore all subversion in the political order simply as blind people. They are themselves the first great wave of social revolution, of moral anarchy and national and religious decadence. They are more deadly, these conventional people, than the organised revolutionists because their position is more contagious and more destructive. There is, after all, a measure of honesty about an out-and-out revolutionist. He knows what he is, and he makes sure that you also are aware of it. He issues his manifestos and tells the world what he plans to do, but the conventional people have a deadlier revolution. They approach Christianity and they bury it under the mass of conventions and forms. They are for the Bible, but it doesn't really mean what it says, and we mustn't go overboard in these things. They believe in Christ, but only in terms of a sensibly modern perspective, of course, and so on. They retain the form of Christianity and the church, but totally deny the faith in actuality. They replace reality with their conventions. The conventional people treat all subversive movements the same way. They are always certain that communists, like Jesus, mean exactly what any sensible, conventional person thinks. They no more take the communists on their terms. Bump up the bass. The sound system and the bass. They no more take the communists on their terms than they take Jesus Christ on his terms. Whatever the communists said yesterday has no meaning today. They're bound to change and become just like us. When I was a boy, Stalin, we were told, represented a conservative reaction against Trotsky. When I was in college, I was assured that, since Stalin was purging the old Bolsheviks, capitalism would soon return to the Soviet Union. And now we are treated to the same old chant. The communists are changing. The reason, of course, is this. The conventional people, having substituted appearance for reality, customs for moral order, cannot face reality in any direction. They cannot see God as God, nor Satan as Satan. They recognize neither good nor evil, only appearances. Nothing else is real for them. All people are exactly like themselves, or they are mentally sick. Conventional people are only blind in the sense that they are self-consciously, deliberately, and passionately averse to facing reality. They are like the people of whom Isaiah spoke, who, hearing will not hear, and seeing will not see, lest their minds understand and their health be restored. Isaiah 6, 10 and 11. The destiny of such people is then to be blinded by God and led to destruction. Their nature and destiny is death. Our nature and destiny in Jesus Christ is righteousness and life. Okay, folks, I think we're going to try to continue on as best as possible. Do it. Why don't we do that? Don't want to artificially stretch it out. '25. The anniversary of communism. In 1967, the Soviet Union celebrated the 50th anniversary of the Socialist Revolution of 1917. Communist publications hailed that event and its anniversary as important dates in the history of mankind. Lenin, in particular, was singled out for great praise as the leader of that revolution. In fact, today, Leninism is the approved form whereby Marxism is to be understood. It's important for us, therefore, to examine Lenin's thinking. The man Lenin was a dedicated admirer of the murderous Nechayev, who advocated the use of total terror, lies, murder, and any means possible to obtain the revolutionary objective. Lenin also commended I'm going to look this up. Pyotr Tkachev. Pyotr Tkachev. Lenin also commended Pyotr Tkachev, a similar degenerate, and he urged everyone to read him. The strategy of these men was to offer the peasants every kind of desirable property and life in order to stimulate revolution, and without anything but contempt for the people. Lenin believed in dictatorship, quote, equal rights, end quote, was a phrase to be used to catch fools. After the revolution in 1920, Lenin declared, quote, all phrases about equal rights are nonsense. On November the 17th, 1917, Lenin declared, we will destroy everything, and on the ruins we will build our temple. It will be a temple for the happiness of all, but we will destroy the entire bourgeoisie, grind it to a powder. I will be merciless with all counter-revolutionists. According to Lenin, human nature craves submission, requires dictatorship. His purpose was to establish total dictatorship and use total power to remake man in the world. Lenin therefore justified violence and oppression. He suppressed not only all hostile monarchistic newspapers and periodicals, but he also suppressed all rival Marxist publications. He justified this by declaring, November the 17th, 1917, to tolerate those papers is to cease to be a socialist. The state is an institution built up for the sake of exercising violence. Previously, this violence was exercised by a handful of moneybags over the entire people. Now we want to organize violence in the interests of the people. Although Lenin talked publicly about democracy at times, yet after a meeting on January the 19th, 1918, Lenin told Trotsky, the dissolution of the makes me sound like a wiener. The dissolution of the Constituent Assembly by the Soviet government means a complete and frank liquidation of the idea of democracy by the idea of dictatorship. Lenin advocated total terror as a means of destroying all opposition, wholesale murder, destruction, and unremitting violence. He saw mercy as a bourgeois virtue, and one of his common remarks was, there are no morals in politics, there is only expedience. Morality was for him nonsense, and he declared to a gathering of young communists, we repudiate all morality which proceeds from supernatural ideas or ideas which are outside class conceptions. In our opinion, morality is entirely subordinate to the interests of class war. Everything is moral which is necessarily for the annihilation of the old exploiting social order and for uniting the proletariat. Our morality then consists solely in close discipline and in conscious war against the exploiters. We do not believe in external principles of morality, and we will expose this deception. Communist morality is identical with the fight for strengthening the dictatorship of the proletariat. Of religion, Lenin said, quote, religion is the opiate of the people, a sort of spiritual liquor meant to make the slaves of capitalism drown their humanity and their desires for a decent existence. When the Bolsheviks seized power, Lenin, in an article entitled, will the Bolsheviks retain state power? No, that's not the voice of Lenin. That's all right. Declared that his program was a success precisely because the Bolshevik seizure of power was so widely detested. We hear the voice of approbation, not in the dulcet dus. not in the dulcet sounds of praise, but in the roar of irritation. Since everyone else was, by definition, the enemy, whatever displeased the enemy had to be good to Lenin. In the same article, Lenin described the necessary ingredients for a revolution. Okay. Skip 2 pages there somehow. An insurrection requires, he said, first, the maturing of the revolution on a general national scale. This means that across the nation, not a majority, but a sizable and active element must come to believe that their only real hope is in revolutionary violence. They must regard all lawful measures as They must regard all lawful measures as a subterfuge and snare, as an attempt to fool the masses into being inactive and subservient. Thus, the first ingredient of revolution is a number of people whose hope and activity is violence and terror. Second, the, quote, complete moral and political collapse of the old. Notice that Lenin placed moral collapse ahead of political collapse. In order to make this collapse possible, everything was done prior to the Russian Revolution to assault, ridicule and deny the religious and moral foundations of the nation. People will not fight to preserve something that is meaningless to them. Hence, by every means possible, the spiritual, moral, and political heritage of a people must be made meaningless to them. This involves an assault on a people's religion and education to make them means of undercutting their intellectual and spiritual roots and reducing them to a position of nihilism. The third necessary ingredient for revolution, Lenin declared, is, quote, great vacillation among all the intermediate elements, that is, among those who are not fully in favour of the government, although they fully supported it yesterday. This point is a critical one. Great vacillation, the inability to make a strong stand. Create revolutionary violence among a people in moral and political collapse, and they will tend increasingly to respond with moral vacillation, unable to make a strong stand. Instead of dealing firmly with violence, they will appease it. Instead of condemning violence, they will excuse it. These morally nerveless and broken men will deny they are for violence and revolution, but they will also refuse to make a clear-cut stand against it. They become thereby a great asset to any revolutionary element and a necessary ingredient for revolution. Lenin's analysis is an excellent one. It is hardly necessary to add that we have all three ingredients for It is hardly necessary to add that we have all three ingredients of revolution in our midst today: the revolutionary activity and violence, the moral and political collapse developing, and the great vacillation and inability to make a clear-cut stand dominating our contemporary world scene as well as the home front. Lenin advocated violence and terror, not a reasoned, dispassionate program. However, this violence had to be planned violence. He liked Karl Marx's statements that the armed uprising, like war, is an art. He cited Marx's chief rules for armed uprising, which Lenin called a special kind of political struggle. First, never play at uprising, but once it is begun, remember firmly that you have to go to the very end. Second, it is necessary to gather a great preponderance of forces in a decisive place at a decisive moment, else the enemy, being in a position of better preparation and organisation, will annihilate the insurgents. Third, once the uprising has begun, one must act with the greatest decisiveness, one must take the offensive absolutely and under all circumstances. Defence is the death of an armed uprising. Fourth, one must strive to take the enemy by surprise, to take advantage of a moment when its troops are scattered. Fifth, one must try daily for at least a small... One must try daily for at least small successes. One may even say hourly when it is a question of one's city, thus maintaining under all circumstances a moral superiority. Both Marx and Lenin both emphasizes Danton's statement. Audacity, and still more audacity. Practically applied, Lenin meant by these principles that communication media should first be seized, telephone exchanges, railway stations, telegraph offices and bridges. Today, power plants would be added to this list. Isolate a city by these steps, Lenin said, and then move on to the various centres. The watchword for Lenin said, The watchword, Lenin said, must be, let all die, but do not allow the enemy to pass. A very important point emerges from all of this. From the standpoint of Western parliamentarians, communist tactics are crude and bungling. These Westerners are sure that the communists will mature and outgrow their inept ways because they equate maturity with parliamentarianism and immaturity with violence. Moreover, because the goal of Western politics is to persuade, not to coerce, they insist on seeing the communist tactics as poor public relations, as an inability to persuade. But to the communists, this Western parliamentarianism is the ridiculous and immature political approach. Violence, they hold, is more successful and more logical given their philosophy of history. Moreover, the communists are not interested in persuading. Their goal is to coerce. Their record of coercion is highly successful. Why should they turn now to persuasion? From the perspective of Lenin, the struggle between capitalism and communism is total war. The strategy he therefore demanded was the strategy of total warfare. This strategy was all the easier for him because he held morality to be a myth. The strategy of total warfare becomes all the easier if your enemy falls prey to delusions and is a victim of wishful thinking and believes that he is on a debating platform instead of on a battlefield. This illusion can be encouraged to make the task of destruction easier. Where warfare develops, the communist screams about his enemy's atrocities in a limited war and at the same time wages total war. The result of Lenin's realism has been a high degree of communist success. One of the central features of Lenin's system is consistency and single-mindedness, a total dedication to one purpose. Leninism cannot be fought by men who mistake war for negotiations and a battle for debate, and who cannot recognize when and where they are being attacked. The Western liberal pays lip service to a few Christian ideas, holds to a Marxist environmentalism and an English parliamentarianism. Like the mule, he is a hybrid and just as sterile. The future can never be commanded by men who cannot command the present. The times call for Christian faith and realism. Nothing less can command the day. I'm getting a bit... my wife's freezing up a bit. Anyway, thanks for listening thus far. If you want to support the work, you can like, share, as I said before. Or if you want to support the work financially, you can go to nadenteacher.com and click on the donates to help me do more better work. Cheerio, folks, and hope to see you soon on chapters